Good evening. My name is Brad Vogel, and I am the Executive Director here at the New York Preservation Archive Project. And I'm really excited tonight because we have our third installment here for you of our series called Inspired by Grassroots Stories, Community Architectural Advocacy. Now that's a lot of words, but I want to focus in on them because the people you are going to hear from tonight embody, their organization especially embodies all of those things. So we are talking about grassroots stories. Now this is an example of people who live in the area in Harlem that we're talking about tonight, and Kelly, our host, is going to get into that a little bit further. But we're talking about real people. These are not people who are necessarily paid to do anything. They are doing this out of their love of their community. We're talking about community. We're talking about the area of Mount Morris Park, the area in Harlem, which is a real treasure trove of architectural wonders, as you will see. And we're talking about architecture. We are talking about buildings, the built environment, the places that people are actually caring about, the places that give them an anchor and a sense of place. And we're talking about advocacy because, as you will see, it takes work from human beings to protect the places that we love in New York City. And that's what the New York Preservation Archive Project is all about. I work with the group that's hosting tonight's series. We're all about telling that story of the people who actually do the work, who are out there advocating, trying to make sure that some of these memorable, integral parts of New York City remain intact for future generations. So thank you, special thank you really to the New York State Council on the Arts, NYSCA. They helped sponsor this, and also to Pat Reisinger. And before Kelly gets into introducing our panelists this evening and the whole story that's about to unfold for you, I want to say that this is also coming to you indirectly because of the work of the Historic Districts Council, our friends there, who helped this organization and this neighborhood through the Six to Celebrate program. Now, the Six to Celebrate program is also, interestingly, funded by NYSCA in part, but that's an effort that helps to get communities organized and assist them in pushing for historic designation. And I'm going to let Kelly take it from there. Kelly Carroll is a preservation consultant. She is also an educator, and I will let her jump right in. Kelly, take it away.
Thank you so much, Brad, and to our friends at the Mount Morris Park Community Improvement Association that have joined us tonight. This is our third series, as Brad mentioned, and what's different about the group we're going to speak to tonight is that unlike Elmhurst, Queens, and East 25th and East Flatbush, which were relatively new preservation initiatives, the Mount Morris Park community has been in the business of advocacy for their landmarks, for their park, for their streets, for decades and decades, going all the way back before the landmarks law even existed. So this is a group that has a history and a culture of activism for their neighborhood. And I'd like to start the evening with a quote from Mayor Lindsay, who spoke about this neighborhood and said, at the dedication of the amphitheater and rec center of Mount Morris Park in 1970. And he said, quote, "I have a hunch that with continued involvement of the community, New York will shine brighter as the cultural capital of the world. There is perhaps more talent in this community of Harlem than in most other parts of the world put together." So I think that quote is still relevant today and is reflective of the character of the residents and how they care for their community and work together. And they do this largely in part via the Mount Morris Park Community Improvement Association. But before we talk about that, we want to figure out how activism really started in this neighborhood. And we have one of our guests this evening, which I'll introduce, is Madlyn Stokely, who is a lifelong Harlem resident and the proud daughter of Hilda Stokely, who served as a powerful role model for social justice for Harlem residents. And she was the chairman of the Mount Morris Park Rehabilitative Committee, We have Syderia Asberry-Chresfield, who is an avid community activist that has lived in the Mount Morris Park Historic District for over 30 years. We have Patricia Eaton. She is the founder of the Mount Morris Park Community Association, which formed in 1981. And we also have Ruthann Richert, who is a proud 30-plus year resident of the Mount Morris Park Historic District, who loves playing a small part in helping preserve its historic blocks, park, churches, and townhouses as the community moves forward into its exciting future. So, with those introductions and that background, my first question, I suppose, would be for Madlyn. Would you like to describe briefly your mother's role as an activist and as chairman of the Mount Morris Park Rehabilitative Committee, which I understand was instrumental in bringing improvements to the park and eventually securing landmark designation for the fire watchtower, which is I'm inside of right now, and the 18th New York City Historic District?
Yes, Kelly, thank you so much. And this is so exciting to be here to share this history about this important community. So my mother was part of the Great Migration from the South that came to Harlem, and she fell in love with Harlem, and she fell in love particularly with East Harlem, and became very early upon her arrival, she began to be very active. She always felt that Harlem should have the same thing that other neighborhoods have, everything from schools to recreation to just general beautification. And so she embarked in a campaign to engage with other concerned residents in the community to bring about quality of life that should be a standard for everyone to Harlem. And so as it relates particularly to, at the time, Mount Morris Park, she felt that at that time that we did not have a quality park in East Harlem for children and families to enjoy. And so she, with other very strong women, began to form an organization. It took a very long time to bring about the first discussion in quite a few years about the fact that Mount Morris Park had to be rehabilitated. It had to have some things in the park that the community needed. And so with a lot of struggle, a lot of work, in 1963, the group won recognition and a commitment from the city to renovate the park and to install a large pool. We have a very small pool over on Madison Avenue, and also the recreation center and the amphitheater. There was a big push by the city to put a band shell as opposed to an amphitheater, which those of us on this call who know anything about the arts knows there's a big difference between a band shell and an amphitheater. And so that group, under my mother's leadership, really pushed back very, very hard because they wanted a quality theater in Harlem. And as you said, Lindsay came and did the opening. That was 70. So they got the designation of the funding in 1963. So you could imagine it was probably, I don't know how many years before that, that they were struggling and working to get people to pay attention that it needed. And then they got the designation of the funding in 63. The New York Times wrote an article in 64, and Lindsay opens the facilities in 70. So it just speaks to the fact that with a commitment, you can do things, but you cannot give up. You have to keep struggling. And so that was a very brief history of my mother's work there, which I believe laid the groundwork. They built on people who were here before. I mean, she didn't just come and there was nobody doing anything. There were people here before. But to get that designation of the landmark with 1971, it was a time when they were talking about tearing down Grand Central Station. And so it wasn't a moment in history where people in the city or the state were even recognizing the fact that we had to hold on to some of our cherished buildings and designate certain communities. So people sort of looked at her with, like she had three heads when she talked about designating this particular area as a historic district. But my mother, being the independent and strong woman that she was and committed to the community, she and the other women working with her just continued to plug on until they were actually able to get the designation as a historic district.
Right, and that designation came in 71, as you said, and when I was doing some research, digging in the archives, I was really surprised to learn that the community had been pushing landmarks at that point in 71 for 5 years for landmarks designation. So this means that the Mount Morris Park community knew that landmarking was an option for them right after the landmarks law was created, which is really, really impressive. And it said that the Landmarks Commission, quote, had pressing matters, and it didn't get around to landmarking right away, and that's why it took 5 years, and that it was actually the presence of bulldozers in the neighborhood that were going to demolish 8 brownstones along Mount Morris Park West and 121 that finally made the Landmarks Commission jump to designate. Can anyone tell me about the history of that and some of the advocacy that went into that to finally make the Landmarks Commission move to designate the first district there, and what was the 18th historic district in New York City at the time?
Well, that again has to come from Madlyn, because with the demolition of those brownstones were taken by eminent domain by Rockefeller, John D. Rockefeller, for drug rehabilitation. And so I didn't even move here until 1980. May I say that Lindsay started his campaign for mayor from the corner of 122nd Street and Mount Morris Park West in the Mount Morris Ascension Presbyterian Church. That's where he started his campaign for mayor.
So what I can add to that question in terms of trying to answer that question is, even back then, and we're having a struggle today, but even back then, there were community advocates that recognized the fact that removing buildings that could be rehabilitated for housing was a priority. That drug treatment facilities were not a priority, that they were not to be brought in this community. And so these same groups of people and the Adaires and the Dollies who lived in this area from back in the 40s continue that struggle to stop the city and the state from changing the community, this particular community, into something that they felt was far from appropriate in such a residential community. And so they just continue that struggle to stop them from pulling down those buildings. It took a long time before the buildings got renovated, and then that comes into MMPCIA's history. But it was just the fortitude of just regular everyday people who fought against that.
Very interesting. So we have the designation in 71, and then a decade later, we have the formation of the Mount Morris Park Community Improvement Association. And I know that Patricia was one of the original founders. And so, Patricia, I would love to hear how that got started and what galvanized you all to form the association that is still thriving today.
Well, the thing is, my catalyst, my impetus comes from the fact that I grew up on the south side of Chicago, where I understand Chicago politics even to this day. And Chicago politics runs because there's a precinct captain on every block in Chicago who knows everybody on every block. There's one person on each block who is attached to the Democratic Party who knows everybody on every block. And so therefore, when I moved here and saw the dirt in the street and this and that, and our history is, as Hilda Stokely had me to understand, believe it or not, as I'm standing up fussing about the dirt in the street, she said, Patricia, do you know that we have garbage collection every day? We didn't even know that in 1981, but we did, and it was filthy around here. So with my daughter, who's been moving back and forth behind me, she is the person who ran up each step and put a little flyer on everybody's door saying, we need a community association. It was just that simple. And people came together. I gave a designated date and people came together. Our first meetings were held at the Mount Morris Presbyterian Church. And I mention it because that's where Lindsay launched his campaign, which is right there on the corner of 122nd and Mount Morris West. And we still hold meetings there to this day. And it went from there. I mean, people were concerned about just quality of life issues and drug addicts putting their needles all around us. And because at that time, by 1981, the community was flooded with drugs. And, you know, there were so many things to be concerned about. The park itself had gone down, you know, the once beautiful park now had no grass in it. We had the beautiful trees in it, but no grass. The pool was there, but not really being used because people were afraid to come to it. And so that's where we were. That's where MMPCIA started. And we started with a very small group. And we started with quality of life concerns. And then one day when I was out walking, I found out that we were about to have in those very brownstones that Rockefeller had declared eminent domain on, they had been allowed to deteriorate. You could stand in front of them and look through them by that time. And someone had decided to put a drug treatment center there. And I said, no, we can't do that. You know, we can't have an institution of that sort there. And we also had a jail sitting on the corner. So, you know, we managed to get our group together and we began to fight on those fronts.
Yeah, that's when I first moved there. And I was so elated to see these posters of a community association. And one of the first things I remember doing is protesting, and we stopped traffic coming down Mount Morris Park West so that they could see our signs about the ruins. We called them the ruins because they were just skeletons, 8 skeletons of these buildings.
And one person who was very instrumental in that was Jeffrey Rualt. He was an attorney with Metropolitan Life. And I think he's the person who coined the ruins as a name, you know. But he was on the forefront of what we needed. We needed an attorney to have us to understand a lot of stuff. And Jeffrey was there for us from the very beginning to help us.
Yeah.
You told us don't take up all your time now, so we're trying not to.
No, you guys are doing amazing.
I would just add regarding the ruins. What we eventually did is teamed up with the architect school at City College, and they had a contest on what those 9 brownstones could actually become. And they won, and they won. We got $25,000, I think, from that for being the subject of their study. And I think that was one of the key things that turned the state around too, to release it from the rehab thing and put it out for bid. They sent out an RFP for what somebody could develop in those brownstones. And the ruins, I guess, were finally made into condominiums in 2002.
Well, the state had to release them.
Yeah.
Because the state owned the property. And we had to fight with the state for a long time to release the property to us. So that, and they finally released it to the Harlem Urban Development Corporation to allow them to develop the property. But that went through years, let me tell you.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was mention of the state ownership when the landmarks law was so young at this point that in many articles it questioned the legality of the Landmarks Commission including them because they weren't sure, you know, they were on wobbly footing, like, are we allowed to do this because the state owns them? Do they have veto power? But in the end, the designation including them was a good thing, even though it took 30 years. They are no longer in a ruinous state. So I heard from Ruthann about how when she came to the neighborhood over 30 years ago, she saw the flyer and was elated about the presence of a community organization. Syderia, how did you get involved with MMPCIA? Because when I personally think of the organization, I just think of you. So I would love to know how you got started and how long you've been involved.
Well, I've probably been involved a good 25 years between myself and my husband. But as soon as we saw the flyers go up as well, I think we moved here maybe 30 years ago. But when we saw the flyers move up, that was one of the first things that we wanted to do as well, was just to get involved. I think anyone that lives in what we consider a small community, and that's because we're the historic district and we feel really proud about where we are and the people that are here, and you want to become a part of it. So that's what we did. And I think we first started with the association during one of its many house tours.
Yeah.
We met her husband. We didn't even know what she looked like, but we knew her husband, and we were in love with him.
Yeah, Derek.
From the very
Right.
beginning.
I'm
Yeah,
sure
you
he
were very helpful.
would
Yeah,
love
was
to
so-
hear that. But then
Yeah.
after getting involved, there were just so many things that was going on at the time.
Mhm.
At any given period, there is always something going on.
Oh, yeah.
Forest Park Community Improvement Association. And I think at that point, they were talking about having the rest of the area extended, the landmark extended. So they were working on, when I say they, I mean the organization was working on the extension. So we had part of the area landmarked, and there were another 6 blocks that we wanted to have landmarked as well. And it took 5 years after, for the original designation. Well, in 1996, the boundaries of the Mount Morris Park National Register Historic District was expanded to include
That's right.
of the area that was not landmarked, but that was in 1996. So if you want to fast forward, it took another 19 years before we actually got that area landmarked. It wasn't landmarked until the extension until 2015.
Yeah.
And that took a lot of work. But what was also interesting is that we got a new commissioner. And once the new commissioner came in, in her name, I see it and it,
Meenakshi Srinivasan.
okay, one more time.
Wow.
Meenakshi Srinivasan.
Right, we
Yes.
remember, we
So
just.
I will
couldn't
call her
pronounce
the
it.
commissioner. So once we met the new commissioner, she was really gung ho about, making a mark for herself and just getting things done. And I think maybe after the first month or two, we were actually in her office, sitting at her desk, speaking with her about why this thing needed to be done, because it was just so many years later. And she agreed. We worked with with landmarks very closely. We worked with people like Kelly Carroll, the Historic Districts Council,
Right.
to get additional information and let us know what the hot buttons were and who we needed to see and speak with. And that's how we were able to get that extension done. So not only did it take time, but it was also having the right people in the right place at the right time.
Right.
And we would have numerous in the second part of that second phase, the early phase, we tried to get together with the community and talk to them in the people in the extension and try to quell their fears about, the control that the city may have on what they do and, give them the landmarks preservation reasons that it makes your property more valuable really in the long run. But we had numerous meetings then, and then there was a pause. And then the second time when we started to get with 6 to Celebrate, we had more meetings and people were much more receptive and asking the right questions.
Right. And you all were a part of the first batch of 6 to Celebrate.
Yes.
Yeah.
We were in the first 6.
Yes. Yes. In 2011, and you got the designation in 15, which was 44 years after the original historic district. So it was very much past due. And like a lot of New York City Historic District extensions, the architectural styles and architects outside of the district in what is now the extension were identical. So you know, it was easy math to rope it in. So when Landmarks did get around to that extension, were you all pleased with the boundary lines, or was there any controversy about any carve outs or anything like that, or did you get the extension that you had hoped for?
I have to say they really worked hard to get what we wanted. And just to use myself as an example, I mean, they didn't know me from anyone else, but they actually carved my building out. And I petitioned them to say, no, I think that we should be included as well. And they went back and they looked at it again. And then they decided, you know what, you're right, that building should be included as well. So they did, you know, give us a lot of consideration, and they came out, and we were very pleased and very happy with the people that we were working with.
That's amazing. I didn't realize that, Syderia.
Yes.
I thought the boundary line would have started like at your house and gone down.
They cut us off.
Yeah. So the organization often describes itself as being the squeaky wheel. And in that vein, do you think that community activism is part of the culture of Mount Morris Park?
I think it remains so. You know, let me tell you, I'm an old woman at this point, but I'll still write a letter or make a phone call. And as an organization, I think that we will still make a letter and make a phone call. I don't know that we still send out the cards and things that we used to. You know, C. Virginia Fields said she knew that when she saw some kind of funny looking colored postcards coming into her office, that the Mount Morris Association was angry about something. So we don't quite do it in the same way, but we're still activists, and certainly Syderia has just encompassed the entire Harlem with her organization. So, you know, yeah, we're still activists. Sure we are.
Yeah, I mean, I believe activism in particularly, well, in communities in general. I mean, I speak about Black communities, because if it were not people in Black communities who continue to feel that they had the right to challenge and the right to push forward, that we wouldn't have much of what we have in communities around the country if it were not some people who just said, we have a right to live with quality and dignity. I don't think that has changed. I think the methods, like Pat said, have changed in terms of organizing and bringing people together. We're trying our best to use technology. We're trying our best also to encourage younger people to become part of it, of the struggle. And they know how to organize, because we see with Black Lives Matters that in an hour, they can get 1,000 people to a location. So we want to harness some of that and help them to become more a part of this particular community, and help us to engage in how we move forward to the next level. Because as Pat said, many of us are at a point now where we know that, you know, it's not going to be that much longer, and it shouldn't be. I mean, we should not be the only ones who are making decisions about our community. The young people is their future, and we want to bring them. And when you talk about someone like my mother, when she was doing this, she was a young woman. You know, she wasn't a mature, wise sage. She was very young, and all the women that worked with her, they were young. They had little children running all around them while they were out there in the park having these meetings and calling the commission and speaking to the funding sources. They were young, and so the young people, we hope, will pick up and continue the struggle. And it's not just a struggle. I mean, a lot of it is fun. We have a good time, you know, so we hope that they see that as something that they want to do in this community as well.
Not only that, you know, as much as we like to see things change, and they do, everything doesn't change. So we're still fighting some of the battles that we fought 40 years ago. And it's a struggle, and we can't stop the fight, and we won't. But just to think about, they were trying to stop, you know, the drug facilities from representing the ruins, so to speak. the drug facilities are still around right now, and we're still, fighting that same fight. And it's a battle, and we're just trying to get the right people to fight with us in order to make a change. But, 40 years later, we're a strong organization, and we're still fighting, and we're not going to stop.
Yeah, and that was so evident when the Fire Watch Tower, which is an individual landmark, designated in 1967, sits right at the top of Mount Morris Park, Marcus Garvey Park. Speaking of struggles and battles, I know that core landmark was being held together with its own rust for many years. And then there was funding put aside, their capital funding from the Parks Department that said, oh, we're gonna fix this thing. And then tick tock, nothing happens. So that has recently been restored and open to the public in a way that it has never been. And I would love to hear how your organization pushed to make that finally happen for the community.
I've been on that one. And that's because it was our organization that took the initiative to really start working with the Parks Department to get this done. Because like you said, it was something that was on their plate for years. And the Fire Watch Tower was literally falling apart. You could actually go up there and find pieces on the ground. And we said, we can't have this happen to continue to just destruct like this. So we got the community together and we spoke with the Parks Department to find out what is it going to cost to get this done, because we don't want to lose this structure. It's the last structure of its kind. And this is a Harlem landmark. We don't want to lose this. And we found out what it took, which was money. It's always money. And it was the perfect storm of there being elections that year. So we were able to get the right people together to give us donations. And we ended up with $4.7 million within a matter of months. And that's what we needed to get this whole project kickstarted. So we were very happy to be able to do that. So the people in the community came together and we worked to make sure that this would happen. After we got the money together and it was like, okay, so you have enough money to take it down. It's like, well, now how are we going to get this thing back up? We were also afraid because a lot of times when things go in boxes and they're packed away, they don't come back to life. So the community had to get together to make sure that this was happening as well. So when the structure was actually sent away to be recasted, I think I was on the phone with the Parks Department every few weeks just to make sure that something was happening. And they were very responsive to say, this is happening, give us details, and this is why it's not. So that worked out really well. And what's so important, and I think a lot of people just don't realize, is that it's all relationship building. I mean, you really have to build a relationship with the people in your community and everyone that's in the community, not just the people, but all of the businesses, the Parks Department, the churches, it's everyone. And it takes a village, and that's real. And that's what it took to get this moving along. And that's what it took to get it kickstarted, to make sure that the renovation was happening and to have it brought back and looking the way it does behind you, Kelly. The structure is magnificent.
Yes, it is.
It is.
And it's something that will be here for decades to come.
Mhm.
Hopefully, centuries.
Yes. Centuries.
And we need money to make sure it's maintained. That's the next struggle.
Yeah, and I was so pleased that because when you go to landmarks hearings and you get presentations from different government agencies, it's always shiny at the beginning, and then how reality plays out is you don't always get what you want. But in this case, I will say that they have park staff there that takes people up into the structure so people can physically interact with the landmark and enjoy the views from this outcropping of stone in Manhattan is really remarkable. So congratulations to you all on making sure that this got done. I think we have time for one more question. And I'm going to ask the group, what's next for you? What do you think should be landmarked? What's missing from your community? Or is the landmark pursuit over? What are your thoughts?
Well, since we were talking about the watchtower, part of our dream with that was also to include the Acropolis. And we fantasized that there could be a funicular to take people up to the top and a restaurant at the top, something like that. But those are expensive dreams, and hopefully people will be able to get up there and do some good recreation safely soon. Yeah.
We'd like to continue working on the quality of life in the district as well, because with the Department of Sanitation, they took away a lot of the garbage cans. And we're just talking about what appears to be little things, but that really make a difference in the community.
Yeah.
We're hoping that we're able to upgrade our quality of life, maybe just to make sure that, let's say, every tree had a border around it, or every tree had plants, or Lenox Avenue was kept clean. If we were able to just make sure that everybody in the community was just living their best life, if they could do that, but at least live a decent quality of life. And I think as an organization, we reach out to find what it is that people need, and we try to help them with that need, because our wants are great. But if we can just make sure that all the stores remain open, everybody, still has food to eat. We were able to give out PPEs during the pandemic, and we were there for people that wanted whatever it was that they needed. So we were there for that. So we want to continue to be able to help the people in the community.
Yeah.
Well, I would say, as far as landmark designation, I would like to see a careful study about what buildings, what areas should be landmarked in Harlem in general, because we have a very low percentage. We just lost a church that I grew up in on 126th Street and Madison Avenue, which is a beautiful, magnificent building. When you compare our landmark designations to an area sort of like the Village, Greenwich Village area, the percentage of landmark buildings are just minuscule here in Harlem. And so not just this district, but a movement to really embrace the beauty that's here. This is just one of the beautiful areas in Harlem. And so to see that the expansion of historic designations, landmark designations, reaches the appropriate proportion is something I would really hope to see happen.
It's been probably about 5 or 10 years since Community Board 10 did a study on Harlem, and they came up with about 6 more districts, small districts. I think one actually was designated, but
The Central Harlem 130 to 132 was like the only thing they did from their list. Yeah.
But that needs to have some attention paid to it.
And my daughter lives directly west of here on Morningside Park, and the area over there with those beautiful houses over there should be considered, certainly between 100 and about 114th Street up to about 123rd. There's some beautiful houses over there, and there have been people over there who reconstructed them, and there was a church over there on Morningside Avenue that just did some crazy stuff, which should not have been allowed to do that, but they did. So between 122nd and 123rd on Morningside Avenue, where they they tore brownstone out and did all kinds of stuff. So that area over there needs to be considered also.
I totally agree. The buildings, the architecture doesn't change above 96th Street. It doesn't. So, all right. I think we're gonna stop, and I'll take some questions. And I want to thank each and every one of you so much. And I'm glad that you're now connected with Brad Vogel and the New York Preservation Archive Project, so that all those papers that we talked about earlier don't get lost or worse. So thank you so much. You guys are like a paragon of preservation activism in New York City. And I thank you for all of your work.
Thank
Oh,
you.
Thank you
much,
for
Kelly.
recognizing us.
This is
Thank
great.
you for recognizing the activity in this area, because the thing that started us off, quality of life, papers on the sidewalk and everything, have not changed. And as Syderia said, you know, we still need to plant trees. And I can tell you, I can remember when the Parks Commissioner, Patrick Pomposello, when I told him how many trees we needed on the perimeter of the park, he said, walk around and count them. And I did, and called him up, and he planted the trees. And we still need trees on the perimeter of the park. So, you know, things change, but they remain the same.
That's true.
It's very true.
Well, this is Sam Brooks, and I'm from Mount Haven, and I just wanted to listen to some of the history, which is amazing history that I just learned today, and I'm looking forward to hearing some more.
Oh,
Thank you, Sam. Yeah, and real quick, next Wednesday, same time, 6:30, we're going to be speaking to the group in East New York, which is called Preserving East New York. So everybody just make a note of that, and it'll be just like tonight, 30 to 45-minute talk with folks out there. And I hope you'll join us for next week.
Thank you. Is it the same link?